when I started, I was thinking, oh, it's about rehabilitation and we're going to help people. I really did think we can help people. Nope, they don't care about helping anybody.
Today on Time We Discuss, I have Mike with me. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Being in law enforcement, what's a typical day like?
My law enforcement was prison and parole. So I also, I'm in the community and working with police and sheriff, and it's kind of all mixed together. So your typical day in a prison is just you're getting there, you're taking all the inmates off the yard, putting them back in their cells, and then you're getting ready to feed. So really, you're just housing and feeding. When I started, I was thinking, oh, it's about rehabilitation and we're going to help people. I really did think we can help people. Nope, they don't care about helping anybody. It's just housing and feeding. And then in parole, I thought, great, I can help people get jobs. It was really something that I thought, wow, you don't have to arrest somebody. You have that gray area of you can look at what crime they committed, and you can defer them to drug rehab, or you could, put them in some sort of housing or employment. And that really wasn't the case either. It was just cycling them in and out of jails and prisons. And so what I thought going in, like a lot of jobs, was completely different from the actual job that I had.
Mike, I'd like to hear that because, when we first start to consider different careers we want to go into, we have what we read about or what's portrayed on TV, movies, but we don't necessarily know what it's really like. So it's interesting to hear you say that. You thought it was one thing going in, and you learned it was kind of something different. So hang on that for a second. At what point did you kind of become disillusioned by the experience? You thought it was one thing, and all of a sudden it's like, no.
So with the prison, it was after about getting over prison, especially getting over the fear of, which you really don't get over, but after about, I would say 6 months, it was like, oh, this is completely different. Because especially you go through an academy, and then even in the academies, they're not teaching you what really is going on in the prison. The academies are just basically for the government to cover themselves. Oh, we trained you to do this, so you should know. And really, in reality, it's completely different from what it is that you're trained to do. And then when you get there, and then with parole, it was just exciting for me to be out of the prison. So I had this kind of, I think it lasted about 5 years in parole, just because I was so happy to get out of the prison, and I was so happy to have a job and have insurance. And so about fifth year with parole is when I was like, this place is so bizarre. And then it was years trying to talk to other people. Don't you find this place bizarre? No, everything's fine. So you really fall into these different jobs. I think a lot of jobs are like cults, and your people are just kind of dealing with it. They don't really see the dysfunction of it. And that was what I saw a lot in law enforcement. It was a cult, and a lot of people it was a job for them, and they really didn't care. Where I came in it kind of thinking, oh, we're going to help people and help society, and nobody really cared to help anybody. And I think it's like the joke about the DMV. They're not really there to help anybody.
Wow. Okay. So that's very powerful. It's very interesting to hear this perspective being on working from the inside. How long were you working in the prison system, and were you at different facilities, or was just one? What did that look like for you?
So I was at one facility, which was a maximum security prison in Los Angeles. And then parole is part of the Department of Corrections. So you're still going back, you still have to go back to the jails and prisons and see the same people. So you don't really ever get rid of it. But I was in a prison for 5 years, and then I was in parole 18 years.
I know very, very little about the tiers of the prison system. So when you say maximum security, that's like the really hardened criminals, the worst of the worst, is that right?
Yes, they'll have minimum prisons, which was another lie of when I signed up for the prison, it was a minimum prison. And when I graduated from the academy, the very day they changed it from a minimum to a maximum security prison, I was like devastated. But really it's by points. It's, you could say you're shoplifting. Well, you're going to be on a minimum yard. And if you murder somebody or serious, crime, then you're going to be on a maximum security prison. So it just all depends. And those numbers change all the time because you're doing day for day. So you do one day, they take one day off. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can kind of get your points up or down. If you're a model inmate, then your points are going to drop. If you're committing crimes in the prison, then you're going to have more points, and you're going to be sent to a worse prison, just more restrictions.
Wow. Okay. Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this. So with education, for instance, with teachers, if they're certified to teach, we'll say, K through eighth grade, the school district or the schools are allowed to kind of move the teachers around within their within their specialty as the school sees fit. So does that happen with people working in the prison as well, that you can move from prison to prison depending on where they need you, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and people do all the time. I just never, I want to be close to home, but there are people that go up and down the state of California. And you can be, you can get disciplined by going to the prison that I was at was like the dumping ground for everybody that got in trouble for all the other prisons. They would dump them at that prison for punishment. So people are moving around all the time. But that's another thing that they don't tell you either is that, you're not guaranteed that one position. You could show up at your prison and go, we don't have a position for you. You have to go, you know, 400 miles away to another prison. So, and then you're always looking at layoffs that they never told you about, or they're, something because your salary was tied to the state budget. So there were times where we had furloughs at one time where they took $1,000 a month away from you. I think it was 1,500. So you're not, you go into it thinking, oh, this is a set job. No, it's a very volatile job. And that's why I tell everybody it's not what you think it is with law enforcement also, because that's the first thing that they always look at with the budget is, oh, we're going to lay off, emergency services. That's always the first to go.
And it's such a shame too, because in my head, the people that are there to help us and protect us, in my head, it's like we shouldn't let those people go. People can make all the arguments they want, but it's like when you're in an emergency and you need help, you're going to wish you didn't cut those tax dollars,
Which is always the case. It's like, then they always were always blaming, why didn't you show up? Why didn't you this? Especially with parole, when something would happen with the parolee was never held responsible. It was always the parole agent that was held responsible for the crimes that the parolee did. And it was infectious. I mean, it was other parole administrators blaming the parole agent for the crime that the criminal did. So it never ended.
Wow. Okay. Okay. When you first went to the academy, is that the same as the police academy, or is this a different academy? What was that?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing as the prison one is, I think it had changed. That was another thing. They had told me it was, oh, it's going to be 6 weeks. And the day I got there, it had been changed to 10. And then I think they changed it to 16 or whatever. And you're there just, it's kind of like the military. You're, running and doing push-ups and, you're not really, I just thought it was odd because you're not really interacting with the inmates, which is what you're supposed to be doing. Like you would think, hey, why don't we talk to the inmates and see what it's like in the prison? No, and you're kind of isolated. So it kind of, to me, was very bizarre. But the reason that they do that is because they're, just trying to cover themselves. But before that, I had internships, which nobody else, I thought you're supposed to have an internship because I was going to college. I was one of the few people that, you didn't need a degree, but nobody was telling me that. They were like, oh, you need this criminology degree. And then I would look around at colleges and nobody had that criminology degree. And really that's a lie also, because you don't, that's like I always laugh at that. People want to, major in criminology. You don't need any of that for law enforcement, for anything, for police, sheriff, or anything like that. You don't need a degree, but the schools are telling you that they are, and the schools don't know. And I would have all these, I only had one professor and he had been a probation officer. Well, probation and parole don't know what each other do, nor do law enforcement. So none of the professors, I realized, never worked in any sort of law enforcement capacity, but they were teaching those classes. So they were also giving me wrong information. So looking back, I got so much wrong information. The worst information that I got was I was doing an internship with probation, and they were telling me about the prison, which they had no idea about. But they were saying, because you have a degree, you're going to be up in a tower. You're not going to be bothered with any of the inmates. So I went in thinking, oh, well, then I'll only be there for 1 year, which was a lie, and then I'll go to parole, which wasn't true at all. And that's how people get stuck in these positions, because you went through this academy and people are telling you all this wrong information, and then you're kind of stuck there and you don't know where else to go. But probation was telling me you're going to be in this tower, you're going to be away. And then when I got to the prison, there's a guy that had been there like 40 years. He's like, you're going to be on the ground for the next 40 years, which was reality because you're the new guy. So you're given all the worst positions, and that doesn't end for years and years.
So, okay, so hang on that for a second. So it sounds like, the low guy on the totem pole, the low person on the totem pole, they get the lousy end. And as you get a little more tenure, for lack of better words, you might have a little more glorious positions.
They all base it on seniority, and you're given a number, and that number goes with you. And then you're constantly, this was the thing that killed me. They're always telling you, once you get to 20 years, it's easy street and everybody's good to you and everybody respects you. And so you're thinking, I'll just get to 20 years. And then you get to 20 years and you're still being treated like crap and you're still getting these horrible positions. And really, nobody cared. Everybody was just lying to you. And you always thought, oh, this place cares about me. And you would always hear other people that would be like, no, this is the only department that cares about their employees. And so you just kind of have to laugh at it because it's just all hypocrisy and it's all dysfunctional. And to this day, when I still try to tell other people, like, don't you think that it was crazy there? They just kind of wrinkle their eyebrow. No, I never noticed, because they're just caught up in that dysfunction.
Wow, wow. Okay. So earlier you talked about being stuck. So eventually you made it out of the you're no longer working in the prison system. You started working as a parole agent. Is that what it was called?
Yes.
Okay. So what was that transition like? How were you able to make that happen?
Again, I was told you got a degree, you're only going to be in a prison, you're going to be in a minimum security prison, you're going to be there for a year. Well, then and really what it is, you're on probation when you get there. And the reason that you're on probation is they ultimately, if you don't work out there, they can fire you. And people are fired all the time, or most of the time they're quitting because it's just so stressful. So, then there was a hiring freeze. So when I finally got all my paperwork, and you've got to have everybody sign off, you've got to have the warden, down to, an office, your sergeant there sign off. So you're getting like 10 different signatures. You got to find all these people. So they don't make it easy for you to leave. And I finally got all those signatures, and then they're like, well, there's a hiring freeze. So then so then now it's just like, I'm in this pit of despair for years. And so when I got to about the 3-year mark, I was like, I got to do whatever I can to get out of here. Because also the economy at the time, all my friends didn't have jobs. So it wasn't like I could just transfer to some other job. There really was, like, this job was the only one that was paying me enough to survive. So I get all my paperwork. I don't hear anything. And well, why didn't I hear anything? Because you got to go through this, you got to interview to be a parole agent. You got to go through these different testing. Well, somebody misplaced my paperwork. So the next year, I walked my paperwork down and got that signed off by the post office to make sure that that person did their job. Because in reality, that happens all the time because they're trying to get their friends into those positions because it's government. And that's another thing they don't ever tell you is it's all about who you know there. And I didn't know anybody. And there's people that are related and have whole families and are all hooking each other up with different, better jobs. And I wasn't that person because I didn't know anybody. And that was another factor nobody ever talks about. So I finally did that. It was like I think there was 5,000 people interviewing for 30 jobs. So I got that. And then they give you an academy date. So that was a 5-year process. Finally got out of that prison. And people at the prison are like, you're never going to make, everybody's negative. They're like, you're never going to make it. You're going to come right back. And I was like, I'm never coming back here. And so I got the date to go to the next academy. And so that next academy, I think, was 12 weeks. And again, you're going back up to Sacramento and going through another academy. And then you don't get a choice of where you want to work. So guess where they put me? I go to South Central. That was where my first, and then you're talking to other people that are like, oh, I got, Pasadena, or I got the different cities that were a little cushier because they knew people and I didn't know anybody. But in reality, working in South Central was great because it was an area that I'd never worked before. And it was the best position because you get into these other buildings where there's less crime, then they focus on you more and they're trying to find problems with you. And so there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of your supervisors are always on you. Which is another thing they never tell you. You're always thinking everybody's going to work together. Everybody in law enforcement's got your back. No, they don't.
Going back briefly to working in the prison, what were the hours like? Are they 12-hour shifts? Is it like 3 days 1 week, 4 days the next? Is there like mandatory overtime? What does that all look like?
They're 8-hour shifts. It's 6 to 2, and then it's 2 to 10. And when you're new, you're usually do your third watch. So you're 2 to 10, which means you're getting there an hour before and you're getting home an hour later. So none of your family understands what you're doing. And then you don't have weekends off. You usually have Monday, Tuesday off. So it throws everything off and you're never around. I think it's very hard for families if they don't have anybody working there because they don't understand what you're doing. They don't understand what's going on. And it's very different from other, a 9-to-5 job. So you're not around your family and you're not around on weekends. And that's when all your family parties are or whatever. And everybody's like, oh, what's wrong with him? Why isn't he here? And so that seeps into people's minds. And I think it breaks up a lot of relationships because of that, because people don't, and it's a different world. And then you're trying to talk to other people about the job that you do, and people just don't want to hear it because they don't really know what it is. And then you're held over all the time because you're new, and you're usually held over on holidays, and it's usually for some reason it was always Boxing days that everybody calls in sick because they want to go drink and watch boxing. Or New Year's was a big one, and then you're stuck there. You can't leave for 16 hours. I was held over one time 20 hours, and they don't care. They don't care that you fell asleep standing up. They don't care. They'll write you up. They'll try to get you fired for that because you're not supposed to be sleeping, but you're forcing me to stay awake for 20 hours. So it's very dysfunctional. It's not healthy for you because I was certainly not, physically or mentally healthy the entire time that I was there, because you just do what everybody else do. You just kind of turn into this zombie of just showing up for work. One month I was held over 7 days in a row, which they're not supposed to be doing, but that's up to you. Then go file a complaint, which never goes anywhere because their HR is even worse because it's a union and they're working against you. They never once tried to help me do anything, because you're given this manual that says, here's all your rights. And it's probably the smartest thing you can do is throw that in the trash, because you have no right. I mean, you have no rights. Nobody is ever going to help you do anything to try to fight for it. They're always going to, that place is going to fight against you. And that's why you have so many people that in the end, they just go out on disability, claim disability, some sort of medical disability, rightfully so, because it tears you apart mentally and physically, because you're always blamed for everything, and everything is very negative, and you really don't have anybody to talk to. And on the other hand, you're not allowed to go to therapy. If you go to therapy, you cannot you can't get another job. You can't they're not going to give you your weapon because now you're mentally unfit. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, that was a thing that always shocked me. It's like, I can't go seek help. They don't want you to go to the gym and make yourself healthier. So you just I gained so much weight, and I was on headache medications and high blood pressure medications. And it's simply just because of the stress of that job, which I never believed when I started either. It was like, oh, those people are weak. And it's like, no, that job will get you.
Wow. Okay. So Mike, this is going to be a tough question, I think, for you, based on everything you just packaged together for me. If you could think of one positive thing that came out of your experience doing this, is there anything positive that came out of that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it really made me understand the reality of life. I mean, really going into having a job, when you're in college or high school, they're taught you just go to college and you'll get a job. And then you go to college and you're looking around for jobs and you can't find any, but you've been promised that you're going to have this job. And really, prison opened up my eyes to this whole nother society going on. This is people, I was always taught, well, it's going to be on your permanent record. And that's not true at all. I mean, there's so many people that succeed with stuff on their permanent record, or, having a rap sheet or whatever, and far succeed anything that I've ever done. So the positive for me was just like, there's so much BS that we're given in life about everything. And you really just have to like assess it and look and go, okay, that's a scam, because you're scammed all the time, and move on. And you can't, I think if you're upset about it and you're harboring that feeling, that's going to eat away at you. But if you just let it kind of go, like improv, you do your stage time and then you leave and you don't look back at it. That to me is a lot healthier, having that frame of mind of having some humor to it and laughing at society, because it really is, life is a tragedy, but you just really do have to laugh at it, because it's so ridiculous. And you see it more and more these days than I ever have in my life, about just how ridiculous everything is. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I can only work on work on myself and my family.
How about transferable skills? Is there anything that you got from working there that was a really good transferable skill, like moving forward? Did anyone look at your resume and say like, oh, this is great? Like, what did that look like for you?
This is another reason that I laugh. Also, you're told like all of this prison and parole, you can transfer anywhere, you can get any job that you want. This is the greatest job in the world. Absolute lie. So when we had layoffs, I went through 2 academies. None of those academies transfer over to any other law enforcement. You would have had to go, because when we had layoffs, went and applied and got another job with Department of Insurance through the state. Well, I would have had to go back through a whole another academy. I just couldn't do it because my daughter was sick at the time. But all of these skills and all this money being spent, none of that transfers over to anything. That's why I tell anybody, if you really want to do anything with law enforcement, be an attorney, because the attorneys are the ones that run everything. Because I would be in court all the time. The criminals are in court. Everything is attached to the court system, and they're the ones that, are the ones that can basically go in and out. You make a good living out of that. You make a good living as a lawyer. You go to school. That same with my degree. My degree didn't transfer to anything. Didn't mean anything. And that was another thing that I would do. The pay was far better than a lot of other agencies, and that was always great. And then I got into it also because I wanted health insurance, and I'd never had a job before that had a holiday. I never knew what a holiday or vacation day was. So there are a lot of good benefits to that job, but none of that I could then take over to another agency. And then the other thing too with those jobs is everything with law enforcement, when you try to transfer over, you got to then go through this whole psychological evaluation. You can have never have gone to, a therapist, because that's a ding for you. There's so many things that are working against you, rather than if you were an attorney, you can go practice law pretty much anywhere.
What's the typical day like for a person that's a parole agent? What's that day like?
So you have a caseload. Like when I was in South Central, it was like 400 points compared to when I was in the San Fernando Valley, which was about 80 points. And so you really have a caseload of, between 60 to 100 at sometimes. So right when I left, it would say there was 60 guys, men and women that I'm watching. And that's every single day. You're trying to find them. You got to see them at their home or their employment, or wherever you can find them. If they're in a tent, you go to that tent and find them. And you're supposed to be finding them a place to live and a place to work, but there are no resources like that. They say that there are, but there's nothing that's attached to parole. It's all farmed out. So then those places that farm it out, say it's a homeless shelter. The homeless shelter is going to take other people before your guy because they have better contracts with them. And that was what just killed me, was we have all this open housing, empty spaces in Los Angeles, and they don't put any homeless there. They just ask for billions of dollars, and yet our homeless remain on the street. So I was very sympathetic to, my job was supposed to help these guys, and the resources were not there. It was just blame the parole agent for everything. And so your day is always different. You're going into a home, you go into a home, and you didn't think anything was going to go wrong, but that person killed themselves that day, or they're have drugs in there, or they have guns in there, or they've there's always so much crime going on constantly, that you get sidetracked, and then you get sidetracked by all the reports that you have to write, and then all those reports get referred to the court, and then you've got to spend a lot of time in court, and so it was just never ending. And that was, I think, what applies to so much stress, is that it just never ends, and you're constantly, the second you wake up, the phone's ringing and you're off and running, and that's going on all until you go to sleep. And a lot of that also is infectious with supervisors who are constantly calling you 24 hours a day, and you're trying to tell them, hey, I have certain work hours. You can't call me 24 hours a day. They don't care. And so you're constantly put more and more work that you're not getting paid for, and they're just telling you should be happy you have a job. And that was another thing that really bothered me a lot, was you're given twice as much work. You're working far more than 8 hours a day, and you're just told, yep, suck it up. That's just the way that it is. Somebody else will take your job. So you're threatened all the time with losing your job. And that's like no other job that I've ever had, where you're just constantly being threatened to lose your job. And then you're having a family, and you're trying to pay a mortgage, and you've got all these expenses. And so you're just taking it day by day and trying to get through that day. And then you wake up and 23 years have gone by.
Wow, Mike, this is such a powerful story, and your perspective is just unmatched. It's just something. I'm at a complete loss of words. It's part of me, it's just like, can it really be this way? And obviously it is. It's so sad. It's such a shame.
It is, and it'll never be fixed. Because I spent so many years just trying to be, hey, why don't we fix the problem? And nobody wants to fix the problem. And I think a lot of it has to do with law enforcement. When you have a gun and a badge, there's a lot of power that goes along with that. And I experience that now that I don't work in law enforcement, interactions with police, and they're so angry. and they're taking everything out on you from, their personal life is then transferred onto you, and they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to be upset with you and mad and mean, and they simply don't care. And I dealt with that with all of my coworkers. Like when I went to retire, the criminals are the ones that called me to say congratulations. Nobody in my office said congratulations that I worked with, because they don't care. It kind of goes back to that idea with the movie Fight Club. He got that idea because he had been beaten up in his office, and nobody cared to ask why do you have a bandage on your head? And he's so right. Nobody cared about your life. I went years with my daughter being in and out of the hospital. Nobody cared. They say that they do, but nobody really cares. And that was the sad part to me about the job. But on the other hand, the criminals calling me and still checking up on me. Okay, I did my job right. At least that's the one thing where I did my job right, and I did at least help quite a few people, and that have called me and said, "Hey," and I didn't think that I helped them, but they had said, "Hey, you were the only one that was there listening to me," because you are, as a parole agent, you're by yourself, and you're going in there and you're getting to know them. You're not supposed to be, you'll get in trouble for being too friendly with them, but you do get to know them, and you're supposed to understand, how to better their life.
Hear what you had to say about the different prisoners congratulating you on your retirement. That's actually a really cool story. That those, you were saying those are the ones that cared. Your coworkers not so much, but those people did. And that's kind of cool. Like hang on to those memories. The one little positive part of the puzzle there.
It took me a long time to realize that you're the only ones. They also have been lied to their entire life. And so they're that little moment in time where they can actually trust somebody. It takes a long time for them to trust you, and they might not do it again, but it really is, they've finally come to know somebody that they can trust. And it might just have been for a day, but their lives, I mean, they have the worst lives that I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, they had a lot of abuse, psychologically, physically, and for them to meet somebody that wasn't abusive to them, which is totally overlooked in that line of work. But that's what it is. It's that they finally found somebody that they thought cared about them a little bit. And it's just unsaid. Nobody talks about that. But that is the reason that they're reaching out and contacting you, is because they actually had a connection with you where, wow, this is somebody that I actually trusted.
Mike, one thing I like to do on my show here is when we're wrapping up, I like to give the person I'm speaking with the opportunity to talk about a project they're working on, a cause they believe in, or a business that they have. So, Mike, I'd like to extend that courtesy to you and hand the floor over if there's something you'd like to discuss.
Sure. I've been dealing with my daughter started having seizures at the age of 2, and so I've been very active in the epilepsy community. There's 65 million people in the world with epilepsy. When I worked as a parole agent, when I worked in the prison, there's absolutely zero training for seizures and epilepsy. There's no protocol whatsoever. There's no protocol in place for schools. So I've been actively working that teachers have to be trained to identify seizures. And I would like law enforcement also to be trained, because there are no laws for law enforcement to be trained. If there's a police officer in the street and somebody has a seizure, the officer immediately thinks that that person is drunk, whether it's an adult or a child. So that I'm actively working to try to get laws changed in the state of California for police officers to recognize seizures. I would also meet a lot of people that had epilepsy, which is a big connection with mental illness. There was a lot of mental illness with the caseload that I had. And those people with had epilepsy didn't have anybody to turn to, didn't have anybody to talk to. And they just basically felt very lonely. And that was very sad to see. And which is another thing to document the fact that there are people that are homeless, that are on parole, that have epilepsy, and there's nothing to document any of that. There's no protocol in place that are helping anybody with epilepsy. And so that's something else that I'd like to see change.
Mike, that's awesome that you're taking this initiative and really trying to make these changes. I personally feel very strongly whenever there's anyone trying to bring attention to anything medically related. I think that's great. I had someone on here several weeks ago. The video has not aired yet. It will have aired by the time this one airs. But they talked about the St. Jude, I think St. Jude Foundation, I think is what it's called, but St. Jude's. So anything like that, I always stand behind 100%, especially when it's anything for the kids. The kids are so young and innocent. Anything like that is always a good cause. Mike, it's been absolutely awesome having you on Time We Discuss and learning what it's like to be working in the prison system.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's a great subject.